Have you ever thought about this? There's this huge, kind of hidden financial tug of war happening right now between generations. On one side, you have this massive transfer of wealth that's already flowing from the young to the old. But on the other, there's this really radical idea to borrow from the future in order to save it. So today, let's try to make sense of this generational ledger.
All right, so let's start with what's happening right now in the U.S. fiscal system. According to an analysis in Reason magazine, the biggest wealth transfer in America isn't what you might think. It's not really rich to poor. Instead, it's a flow of money from the relatively young to the relatively old.
And this really gets to the heart of the matter. Is the current system basically set up to have younger, working Americans prop up what is, by many measures, the wealthiest generation of seniors in history? Let's just look at the numbers.
Okay, get ready for this number, $73 trillion. What is that? Well, that's the projected shortfall. It's the total amount of unfunded promises for America's big social insurance programs over the next 75 years. Just let that number sink in. It is a staggering IOU written to older generations, and the bill? Well, that gets handed down.
And this chart, wow, this really shows you who's on each side of this transfer. Just look at that gap. The average household net worth for someone under 35 is about $183,000, but for someone over 75, it's over $1.6 million. Today's seniors are, as a group, the wealthiest they've ever been, while younger people are dealing with a completely different financial world.
And yet, this just spells out the challenges younger folks are up against. They're trying to navigate this landscape of crazy housing costs, massive student debt, and just slower economic growth overall. And all of this while being on the hook for a national debt that just keeps climbing. This is the reality for the people who are funding the system.
Okay, so how does this whole system actually work? How does the money flow? Is it a fair trade? Do you actually get out what you put in? Let's dig into that balance between what people contribute and what they get back.
Now, you always hear the defense, right? But seniors paid into the system. They earned it. And that's true. Of course, they did pay in. But the argument here is that if you look at it from a purely financial, actuarial point of view, the math just doesn't add up. The amount being paid out is way bigger than what was paid in.
And here are the numbers to prove it. For Social Security, a typical retiree can expect to get back about 37% more in benefits than they ever paid in taxes. And then you look at Medicare, and the gap is just huge. Seniors are often getting back 3, 4, even 5 times the amount they contributed. And that imbalance, right there, is the core of the issue.
So when you put all this together, you can see why critics don't just call this a safety net. They use a much, much stronger term, a slow-motion generational fleecing. The argument is that it's a system that is structurally designed to penalize the young in order to over-deliver for the old.
Okay, so just hold on to that idea of generational fleecing for a second, because we are about to completely pivot. We're going to shift from this financial debt we owe to the past to a totally different kind of debt we might need to take on from the future, and for a very different reason.
This question just flips the whole script. What if we're thinking about intergenerational transfers all wrong? What if they're not about entitlement, but about, well, survival? What if borrowing from our grandchildren is actually the only way to make sure they have a world to inherit in the first place?
And this idea brings us to our second source. It's a PhD thesis from the University of Reading, and it explores this really radical new way of thinking about how to finance climate action. It argues we have to completely rethink how we pay for the transition to a green economy.
The core concept is called borrowing from the future. And the logic is pretty straightforward, right? The climate crisis is an emergency. We have to act now. But the biggest benefits of that action, a stable, livable planet, will be enjoyed by future generations. So the question is it fair to ask them to help shoulder some of that financial cost?
So how would you even do that? Well, one of the proposed tools is something called green quantitative easing. Now that sounds super complicated, but the gist is this. A central bank would basically create new money, but it would be specifically to buy long-term green bonds. This would pump a ton of cash into climate solutions right now, but it would spread the cost out over decades to be paid back by those future generations.
Okay, so now you can see the collision course we're on. We have these two incredibly powerful and totally competing ideas about generational debt. And it puts us right in the middle of this deep, profound question of fairness. Who owes what to whom?
So in one corner, you have the argument that the young are already being drained, that they're being forced to pay into a system that gives way too much to a wealthier, older generation.
And then in the complete opposite corner, you've got this argument that making our grandkids pay for climate action is itself an act of justice. Why? Because it ensures that the financial burden is shared by the very people who will benefit the most from a habitable planet.
So let's just break this down to its simplest form. Younger generations today are essentially being asked to do two huge things at the same time. First, pay off this massive IOU to the past to fund these social insurance programs. And second, take out a new, massive loan on behalf of the future to pay for climate action.
So let's try to visualize this. Imagine one single giant ledger, not just for today, but for all generations, past, present, and future. And on this ledger, we've got these two massive IOUs pulling in completely opposite direction.
This table just lays it all out, side by side. It's so clear when you see it like this. You've got social insurance moving money from young to old as a safety net. Then you've got climate finance, which shifts costs from the present to the future for, planetary survival. But look at the criticisms. One side calls it a fleecing. But you could imagine critics of the other idea might call it intergenerational extortion, forcing future generations to pay for a mess they didn't make, even if they benefit from the cleanup.
And this is the key takeaway, really. The current generation is stuck right in the middle of this incredible tug-of-war. We are paying for promises made decades ago, while at the exact same time, we're being asked to finance the survival of generations that haven't even been born yet. These aren't two separate issues. They're two sides of the very same coin of intergenerational fairness.
So, that leaves us with this massive, almost impossible question. Our generational ledger is completely out of balance. We have these monumental debts to the past and these seemingly infinite duties to the future. If we can't afford to do both perfectly, which one do we prioritize? What's the right way? What's the just way to balance these books?